Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today is my very own coach, the guy who taught me the kettlebell kung fu back in the day, Scott Stevens of OmahaEliteKettlebell.com. Scott and I go way back. Literally, I think the first lesson we did together, I think, was in like 2008. So it'll be by August of this year. It's gonna be 14 years, which is really crazy to think about. Scott is a very interesting specimen because he started with Taekwondo and a wide variety of other training modalities before he landed on the kettlebell. And one of the really very few people I know who truly took to the kettlebell like a duck to water and has been able to use that to help transform people both in terms of their fitness goals, their martial arts skills. So we're going to go into that a little bit in the episode. And before we get started, obviously, if you're a new listener, I would highly recommend that you get your hands on my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. It is, as the name implies, only 9 minutes long, and it's designed to be done in conjunction with whatever else you're doing. The movements in it are almost technique free. They're very simple to learn, but very effective because they use the entire body, specifically through the gait pattern or your walking pattern. So a lot of people find that it helps with their kettlebell training, their body weight training. It improves their strength, their stamina, their coordination. So go to 9minutechallenge.com and you can get your own free copy of that. It is a raucous good time. I think you will enjoy yourself. So without further ado, Scott, welcome to the Hammercast.
Thanks for having me.
You know, this is we've talked about about you coming on for ages. So I'm glad we were able to finally make it happen because I know you've got a very busy schedule. Obviously, like I've got a very oddball schedule as well. So we were finally able to make our paths cross.
Yeah, didn't help any of them a little camera shy or whatever, podcast shy. So yeah, it's happening.
We're going to disabuse you of that because this is going to be your first podcast ever. And I think that the number of knowledge bombs that you're going to drop are going to interest people in hearing much more from you. And I would definitely encourage people to follow you. Like I said, I mean, you were the guy who taught me how to stop screwing up with kettlebells. So certainly
work or
yeah, whatever happened to that? I guess it turned out all right. Like I was telling the listeners just kind of before we began, I remember, I don't know if you probably remember this, but this was like, it was 2008. I had just gotten started in like, it'll almost be, it was like either late March or early April. A friend of mine got me into kettlebell training. And I was just kind of making the shapes of the kettlebell moves that I saw in Enter the Kettlebell because he loaned me a copy of the book and he loaned me a kettlebell. It's my friend Drew Christensen, who was a
friend.
Yeah, very good friend, exactly. And but I started to notice like, my knees don't feel great. You know, my low back kind of bugs me. Shoulders are feeling kind of weird. And I at the time, I don't know. I'm sure Dragon Door had the directory of instructors, but I just didn't have the foresight to check it. But it was very fortunate because you had written something into the local newspaper, the public or the opinion section of the Omaha World Herald called the Public Pulse. And it was based on an article that had appeared in there that was kind of denigrating kettlebell training as being sort of like, oh, it was a fad, it's like, it's not really going to do that much for you. And then I remember reading through the Public Pulse because I always like to hear people's stupid hot takes. But then I saw something about the kettlebell, and it was basically repudiating the article, saying that it was not an accurate representation. And actually, here's what kettlebells have done for my clients. And it was signed Scott Stevens, RKC. And I was like, oh my God, like there's an RKC in Omaha. Like I had just never, I just didn't know that. It was something that I thought the closest one that I could think of was I had read about was, I think, in Lincoln. And so I was very excited to find out there was somebody in Omaha. So I looked you up using the power of the information superhighway and got in touch with you and then set up the first appointment sometime in the middle of August of 2008. And you might remember a little bit more than I do because I think I know that we've kind of gone back and forth about the first time that we met up, but like, what was your I'm curious because I genuinely don't remember much for myself. I know I wasn't doing things great. What were some of the mistakes I was making when I was doing like swings and presses and whatever?
Wow. I remember you, and I think I remember the press groove was pretty wild. I think it was really wide, kind of a big, more like a Arnold shoulder press, something
Right.
like that. But honestly, I mean, that was so long ago.
Yeah.
I do remember the very annoying question you asked me to check out your pistols. You're like, am I doing this right? And I couldn't do a pistol yet. And you dropped down and knocked out a few and asked me if they're okay. And I wanted to kick you. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's funny because that was like one of the few things I think that came a little more naturally to me. And this is like almost like a fluke because I remember the first time I'd ever even seen a pistol squat was in The Naked Warrior because Drew loaned me that book as well. And I thought, okay, one arm push-ups, that's definitely seemed beyond my abilities, but let's try this pistol squat. And I managed to do one, but it took like every ounce of my strength, to make it happen. But the kettlebells definitely did not come naturally to me. But one of the things that I thought was especially interesting about you was that when I saw you do a swing for the first time, I was like, okay, that is what it's supposed to look like. Like I'd seen videos, but I remember you were able to go from like, loose and fast. And then like, bam, you were like a statue for like a moment. Like the kettlebell just seemed like it didn't weigh anything. And what was especially interesting about you is I found out you were basically self-taught with a kettlebell. Like I was too, and I was a complete disaster. And then you were self-taught and you went through the RKC and you completed it with no problem.
Well, yeah, I was self-taught, but similar to you, I was mimicking what I saw in books, right? And so I remember making some pretty amazing mistakes. So for example, one of them was misunderstanding Pavel's instructions on how to do the dice roll and program your swings and ballistics at the end of the program. So if you rolled 12, you did 12 minutes. If you rolled snake eyes, you did 2 minutes. To me, that meant 12 minutes without setting the kettlebell down. I don't know how I made the mistake. So I'd actually built up to doing that, where I could sit there and do the 28K one-hand swings and two-hand swings without setting the kettlebell down somehow. And then when I went to the RKC and John Ingham was my team leader, he showed me, he's like, you're a little off. Let's go down to the 16K. And I thought, this is child's play. Why are we using the 16K? And they showed me how to swing properly. And I remember just the shock and, how much my abs were feeling after 10 reps with almost half as light a bell.
Yeah.
Wow. So to say I was self-taught, well, to a degree, and then I was corrected,
Sure. Yeah.
Quick.
Yeah. That's a common thing. I mean, it's people go into the certification weekends, and now obviously it's strong first, but they go into the certification weekends, I think now better prepared than back in the day, because I remember at my own RKC in 2010, like there were people there who were like, I didn't know we were going to have to do like a snatch test this weekend. It's like, do you have to do it like first thing? How did you not know this?
Yeah, it was like, welcome to the certification. Grab your bell and go outside, and we're going to watch you not die, maybe, over the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Operative word here is maybe. And it's funny too to think back then, it was like the whole reason I signed up for it was because it was like, to me, it was like a physical challenge. Like the fact that it was an instructor certification was completely secondary. Like, I guess in the back of my head, I knew that it was an instructor certification, but the way they had it set up was really just like 3 days of hazing pretty much. Yeah.
That, to me, that really meant something, the challenge at the end of it, Russian kettlebell challenge. Ooh, I'm interested.
Exactly. And I think, to be fair, it's still quite challenging, but they've obviously changed the way certain things are ordered, because again, they're not doing snatches in the first day. You're learning those the second day, and then you do your snatch test on the third day. And so I think it is better oriented toward people who want to be instructors, but they've kept a good deal of the actual challenge element to it.
Oh, absolutely. It's just they've become more intelligent with how they've structured the teaching and learning process. And
exactly.
It wasn't exactly probably the wisest thing to put the hardest thing up front without any instruction. So
I'll be quite frank, I agree with you, but I'm also glad that they were doing it like that when I went through it, because it was like the rest of the weekend for me, because at the time I was very well conditioned, but I wasn't that strong. And by the third day, I was just worn down from all the work. And because I didn't have really this reserve of strength, I don't think I could have done it on the third day. So it was, for me, it was fortuitous, all those years ago that they had it first, because it's like, gutted it out. Yeah.
It's got pros and cons, definitely. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think it's smarter that they have it last now. And I had done my snatch test even before I had arrived, meaning I had completed it at least, I think, 3 times. So I knew I could do it. And I've, I've been to certifications where there were people who hadn't completed their snatch test ever, or had never gotten, I remember when I was assisting in Croatia, there was a guy who had never done more than 60 snatches with a 24, but on the third day he did 100. And they weren't ugly reps, it was not like, it didn't look terrible. So the way they have it set up certainly works. That is nice to see. Now, one of the things too that I want to mention is, because you were sort of old school with it. I know you started in 2007, I think is when you started lifting kettlebells, right?
Maybe even earlier, but yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Let's say 06, 07. So quite a while. And back in those days in particular, it nowadays, I think there's a much wider array of people who come in to the cert. I mean, again, it's an instructor certification, but a lot of people are still doing it for kind of the rite of passage feel, like they've accomplished something. But back in those days, it was a lot more hardcore people who were doing it, like martial artists, as Pavel liked to say, people who look like they belong in a federal witness protection program, stuff
Let's
like
put
that.
it this way. I felt really out of place when I showed up there. So.
And for those of you who don't know Scott, Scott is definitely he's a tough dude. He's very muscular. He's got we're a 5th degree black belt in Taekwondo. He's not to be trifled with. We'll tell some fun stories about that too, because I know that you've got some good stories. So for him to say he felt out of place by the people who were there should tell you just the caliber of people who were there.
Yeah, in my group in particular, I felt like I was showing up to the NFL combine or something. There were some towering physical specimens all around me, and I thought I was really in for the beating of my life. I thought I was done, so yeah, I didn't know what I got myself into.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way that it was. I remember there were a couple people at the various certifications that I've been through who are like just gigantic humans, and you're like, man, they've got some obvious advantages, like when it comes to the snatch test in particular. You got a guy who's like 225, like ripped to shreds, and very athletic. Yeah, like they were just, it was like, the 24 kilo was like nothing to them, and so 100 snatches was like a joke. But for me, man, I at 155 pounds back then, I put on some weight since, but yeah, at 155 pounds, snatching a third of your body weight 100 times in 5 minutes is like chaos.
I remember when I went through it, it wasn't even 100 reps in 5 minutes. It was some number based on your body weight, and you were allowed one hand switch. So
that's right.
I want to say it was like 70 or 80 reps maybe with one hand switch. I'm not sure the number.
Yeah.
But it wasn't easy. And over 60% of the people in our group failed it. I remember that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. I mean, even now, I think the numbers are like 25 to 30% as like an average. People underestimate how tough it is. It really is tough.
Yeah.
But you had quite a pedigree going into it. Again, like, for me, I was more of an enthusiast, but you've been like a lifelong martial artist and athlete. So give us a little bit of like the origin story, like how you got into martial arts and physical fitness in general, and some of your accomplishments within the martial arts world.
Well, I got into it just, grew up in the 70s. So Bruce Lee was still a big thing, and the Bruce Lee poster on the wall, and Dad would take me to see Chuck Norris movies and all that kind of stuff. Right. So I'm not sure how much my mom was aware of, but I was always being snuck in to see rated R Chuck Norris and First Blood and all this kind of stuff. And I know he tried to sign me up in martial arts several times to get me started, and I was just too young. The instructor's like, nah, come back next year. So I think I finally started at age 7. And I remember my first class, because I wiped out really hard trying to emulate the instructor, and just kicked so high they pulled my bottom leg out from underneath me, and I smacked the ground, just 5-point landing basically, and started crying instantly. So I remember that first class very vividly. But that's how it started. And then, so that was probably like 1978, something like that.
Wow.
And just stuck with it. And as I went into college, we had a martial art club there, and the instructor of that martial art club taught several other martial arts that I always wanted to learn, but never knew. So I joined that. And I basically had to start back over. I think I was a 3rd degree black belt at the time, and I had to start over at white belt, which was fine and kind of fun to kind of take people by surprise. So then you work your way back up real quick. And I got up to 4th degree black belt with him. and then I had to start over with another instructor and work my way back up to 5th degree black belt.
Incredible. And that's in Taekwondo?
Taekwondo, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we got to talk a little bit about that, because I know, I mean, I don't know how much you're at liberty to talk about, but I know you had some great stories about the two masters that you trained with in Taekwondo, like just some of the escapades and really how hardcore these dudes were, because they were from Korea, right? Both of them served in the military, I think.
Yeah, both of them were South Korea. One was from the Tiger Division. The other was a bodyguard to the president. So
not, you know, just like enthusiasts. These were people who were living it.
Yeah, these were guys that were using their skills probably not in the nicest of ways. Yeah.
To put it very lightly, yeah. Now, I remember you had one instructor in particular. I love this story because I think even now you can't quite figure out how the move is done, but you had said you had this instructor who had, as a blue belt requirement, you had to do this thing where you would do like a wrist lock and then you would throw the person over your head, but he had to remove it because nobody could do it. And he couldn't really teach it to people. It was like, it might as well have been like the 5-point exploding heart technique, you know?
I forgot about that. Yeah. So obviously I told you that story. He didn't remove the curriculum. It was just this one move that showed up in blue belt. So we went white. In his system, we went white, yellow, orange, green, blue, red, black. So you're over halfway, and all of a sudden here comes this one technique. Everything else is very doable. Everything else is based in physics, very easy to understand how to make something work. Even if you couldn't do it yet, you understood the application of it. More practice, I'll get it. This one is like he expected you to be a Jedi. It just made no sense. And so somebody would grab your wrist, both wrists, and without grabbing them back, you're supposed to flip them over the top of you. Well, he could do it every time. So if he demonstrated it to me, it felt as if I was super glued to his wrist, even though he had not grabbed me back. And you'd go flying 5-6 feet behind him and you'd break your fall and get back up. And his English wasn't the best. His accent was kind of heavy. And so the best verbal instruction he would give us would be something along the lines of more, faster, or why you so slow. That would be about it.
It's so stupid. That was another piece of advice he would give, right?
Yeah, you're so stupid. Yeah, that's a common one. So anyway, we had a black belt class one day, and we're trying to rehearse this technique because everybody struggled with it. And during those 3 hours, we probably did several hundred repetitions. And one of my partners, which were changing partners frequently, I ended up with the biggest guy in the room, and he's towering over me. I'm like 135, maybe 150, and he's probably 300 easy. And we're doing this. And in my mind, I just checked out. It's hopeless. I'm going through the motions. I'm doing the best I can, but I'm no longer really trying to throw him. And all of a sudden he goes flying over the top of me. And he pops up like an excited puppy dog. How did you do that? How'd you do that? And I thought he was just totally messing with me. It's like, no, you really threw me. But it's that one moment where I checked out, just let, I don't know, the training take over, you know, and it happened. But I've done that technique once in my entire life.
You became a Jedi, you know, like you used the Force. That was maybe you didn't hear Obi-Wan saying, use the Force, Scott, but that was the effect.
Yeah. That technique still floors me. So,
yeah. Yeah, I know that you had some other great stories about your Taekwondo prowess. And one of my favorites was what John Angham evidently witnessed. And this was years before you met him at RKC. People who don't know, John Angham is a grandmaster Taekwondo instructor and very, very talented martial artist. I mean, you don't get to a grandmaster level without, you know, having some incredible skills. But there was a tournament that you were at, because I know that you used to compete quite a bit back in the day. And I remember you mentioned the story a couple of times, how you were at a tournament and you accidentally clipped a guy a little too hard. And then it ended up being that you had to just like mow down like an entire like contingent of people. And Angham was witness to it. So I'd love to hear this story, because I think this is like.
Well, I got to make a few corrections. It was not a tournament. It was a sparring seminar.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And it was after I had met him. So he was my team leader in 2008. And I think this was probably around 2010, 2012.
Oh, okay.
So I go to the sparring workshop, and it was with a former Olympian, and part of the routine was we were warmed up and doing some sparring drills without any gear on. So it's friendly sparring. You know, we're allowing each other to get tagged and stuff like this. We're allowing each other to practice these techniques. There were no headshots. We may have had on forearm guards, shin guards, and that's about it. And so we're playing around, and wait, I'm out of place. We were at a part where we actually had full gear. That's what it was. So we're actually sparring with full gear at this point, and nobody's wearing belts. So you have no idea if you're fighting a 5th degree black belt or you're sparring with a complete newbie, right? So I'm sparring with somebody, and it was pretty evident really quickly that this guy was newer. And so I'm just having fun, not trying to tag him, but we're practicing our skills and we're going fast. And I threw a kick, and I realized in my mind, I was expecting him to totally see this coming and react a certain way and avoid it easily. And he totally zigged when he should have zagged, and it stunned me. And I tried to pull my kick and stop myself from hitting him in the head. I really tried. And sometimes when you pull a kick, it has the effect of acting like a whip. So you kind of accidentally accelerate it a little bit because you're trying to pull it. So basically that's what happened. I pulled it, and he just dropped like he was shot. And I felt horrible because that was not my intention. The last thing you want to do is go to a workshop and get knocked out.
Yeah.
Like I said, you know, everybody's got their livelihoods and jobs and everything else. So I felt bad. He was very upset with me. And then his friends were around, and they were very upset with me. So we end that match. The instructor of the workshop saw the whole thing, didn't care. So we just go right into the next match, and I'm going to sit out. Well, one of his buddies just kind of singles me out, and he's like, me.
Like the kung fu thing, like across the way, like just pointing the finger.
Basically. And John Ingham's there, Grandmaster John Ingham, and my team leader. And here's these other people that I respect, and I'm a black belt, and I have students there. Well, I'm not going to back down. So I go up there. This guy's legitimately trying to take my head off. So I remember he was taller than me, and the first kick he threw, I'm anticipating a long leg, and I'm thinking I have plenty of distance. And he kicked so close I could smell his foot. I can still smell it thinking about it. So anyways, it was on. He was really trying to tag me. And at that point, I didn't care. So I tagged him, and he went down, you know. And then another one of his friends came out, and same thing. I think I got that guy with a back kick or something like that. And they ran out of friends, and we were done sparring. So
it was like in Gladiator. Are you not entertained? Like after you just.
But you know, we had gear on. It wasn't like I didn't think we hurt people. I honestly felt really bad about the first guy, and the second two I didn't care. You know.
Yeah, exactly. You got over your stigma of wailing on somebody completely unintentionally, and you're like, you know what, this is actually fun. I forgot how much I enjoyed this.
Well, you know, when somebody knows what they're signing up for, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we're going to try to hurt you. Well, okay, that's different. You know.
Totally. So. Yeah, it's complete. I know exactly the feeling, because even though I haven't really done martial arts in a while, I remember one time I was sparring with a gal. This is when I was doing Krav Maga, and the gal in particular was like really, really good. She was shorter than me. She was obviously like lighter than me as well. And it was just kind of like, you know, touch sparring. We weren't trying to, you know, to hit anybody really hard, but it was like, I think it was maybe one of those whip things as well. But I remember it was like a very light tap to the ribs, and it really was not hard. I mean, it wasn't even, actually, I really couldn't compare it to what you're talking about, because it wasn't like, you know, all of a sudden it accelerated or anything. It was just, I hit like, I think with my toe at just the right spot, like between a couple ribs, and it like, yeah, and she like really, really felt it. So it's and you know, I remember we had shin guards on and head guards and like big boxing gloves and everything. It was just, sometimes that happens, you know, when you're sparring. And so
yeah, it's pretty shocking that, to me, it's the equivalent of a bullet. It's very small, but it's going to cause tons of damage. If you do it just right, it doesn't take much. And it's always a shock. You expect to have to put a lot of effort into it, but if you just do it right with speed and you're relaxed and they absorb all of it, they're going down.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you know, people can see quite quickly if they're not familiar, you know, like you mentioned, that guy was totally new. You know, they've got some things that they're going to have to do to fix their defenses. Yeah, I mean, at least in my case, the one cool thing that happened was that I was given the nickname Feet of Death. I don't know that it really caught on. It was just one guy who called me that, but I thought it was very funny. Now, the other thing that I thought was very cool is that even before you started training people with kettlebells, you were training people in Taekwondo, and I know that you've produced a number of junior Olympians, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the Junior Olympics is a big national tournament we go to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, I'm curious too. Now, how did your training of them change from, let's say, before kettlebells to after becoming an instructor?
How did martial art training change?
Yeah, like, you obviously have them do drills in class, and there's going to be sparring, and for that, it's, they've got to do their the techniques that they've learned. But like the physical training side of it, I think a lot of times what we think of when we think of like martial arts class, yeah, it's like people are doing a bunch of push-ups and they're doing a bunch of maybe burpees and squats and stuff like that. So what kind of like, how did you integrate the kettlebell into that to make them more effective?
At first that was really tough. Later on, I would segregate class and have an advanced class, and we could very easily do something like you go, I go swings. But it seemed to fit in there pretty naturally. Do some swings, do some sparring, do some push-ups, do some swings, do some push-ups, do some sparring, but you just use the strong first or hard style principles we learned and apply it. I think one of the biggest things was seeing how the principles learned with the kettlebell and taught by Pavel were just a natural marriage with martial art techniques, and especially the teaching style. The aha drills were huge. So that instantly changed the way I was able to teach things more quickly in martial arts. So with an aha drill, like the swing, how we can sit there and get somebody to hold out a plank, give them some tough love, where they can really kind of freeze that technique in time, and you can walk around and teach them how to tense up the correct muscles and then go back to doing the swing, right? A lot of times you can see instant transformation. So that same thing, you apply it to martial arts. You have somebody strike a stance, you maybe push on the parts of the body that needs to be providing more tension and more resistance. And all of a sudden they can feel how they have to be connected from their fist down to the tip of their opposite toe. They can just feel it now. It's something they didn't feel before. And now go ahead and demonstrate your punch again. And it's just night and day difference, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was really huge.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense too, because, I think strength training, really, obviously there's technique that goes into it, there's skill that has to go into it, but I think it's easier for more people to pick up on average than something like punching and kicking, which is, for all intents and purposes, it's like ballistic type of work, because it's not being done slowly, it's being done very quickly. And I think that the approach that you take with strong first, where you start off with something slow that is basically the same movement pattern. So let's say like just a basic hinge into a deadlift, into some swing progressions, and the plank, like you mentioned. All of this stuff, I think, makes it a lot easier for people to understand, because it's like there's kind of a missing level. It's like they can make the shape of a punch or the kick, but they don't necessarily know how to put a lot of force behind it, or they don't know how to make it come from the hips, and then from there they don't know how to root into the ground to really project it much more quickly. So I can see how the kettlebell would help a lot with that. Now, I remember too, we've talked a couple times about some, I thought this was really ingenious, some of the ways that you would take kettlebell drills, not just in general, like, have them do some swings and then have them do some planks and stuff like that, but you would combine kettlebell drills and then a martial arts movement that has some level of, let's say, like relation. So I know you talked about, I think, a back kick. You'd have them do like pistol squats or something like that. So
yeah, so that goes back to just using the aha drill principle. Find something that feels the same or uses the same muscles in a slower manner or a static manner, and then have that carry over to the fast movement, right? So a hack squat, for example, doing a hack squat with a respectable weight, one where you have to kind of grind through it, and then doing a front kick with the ball of the foot. It's a instant kind of connection, right? It feels very similar. Doing the pistol and the back kick, doing knuckle push-ups and a punch, doing a get up and a Superman punch. They're basically the same things, right?
Yeah.
So Yeah.
I like that a lot because I think in particular what you talked about, like with the ball of the foot for like a front kick, for example, and Dan John has said the athletics is done on the balls of the feet, and in the weight room you're going to be on your heels, or something to that effect. I think he probably had a more eloquent way of stating it, but there are obviously movements like you mentioned, the hack squat, for example, which teach you how to use the balls of your feet for things, and the making that like the focus of the movement, like the reason you're doing this, it's not just to strengthen your legs, but it's actually something that, number one, will certainly make them stronger, but is going to have a nice carryover into a specific technique. And this is another great example. You can use a slow movement like a hack squat with a fast movement like a front kick, and have and get the proper outcome probably much more quickly. Did you ever do that a lot with like the students that you had, or was this just stuff that you would do in your own training?
This is stuff I would always just experiment with,
Yeah.
And usually with the higher up students, like red belts, black belts, things like that.
Yeah.
So I got a whole list of those, like single leg deadlift and a axe kick, or a single leg deadlift and a spinning hook kick. Just the way you have to activate your hamstrings and glutes at the end of the kick to get the power into it. It feels the same. So it's just a big light bulb moment for a lot of people who don't understand how to activate that muscle.
Yeah, that's huge because, like, again, Brian Oldfield, who was a very famous, he was a thrower. He used to say you can't think your way through a ballistic movement, and that's what I like about your approach, is that you would take movements that you can think through and make it very clear what the intention is supposed to be, so that when you translate it to a movement that you really can't think through, like a punch or a kick, it becomes a lot more obvious how it's supposed to be done. And beyond just that, I think this has just been my experience, but in the martial arts world in particular, like martial arts instructors are kind of like notorious for maybe being good at the thing themselves, but they're dealing with people who are not natural athletes, and they don't actually necessarily know how to teach movement. So they might be able to teach you like a certain exercise, and then the student might make the shape of the exercise, like say a push up on the knuckles or something like that. But they still lack the ability to fire up the proper muscles, like, or you gave a great example with the single leg deadlift and the axe kick. What were some of the other benefits that the students would notice in doing this, in addition to just the techniques? Like, did they have better flexibility, better coordinate, like eye-hand coordination, things like that?
Well, I think that the more disciplines you kind of attempt, the more you can connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
The more you kind of see this kind of universal truth about movement or athleticism that's underneath all these, right? So if you can teach somebody how to do a front kick well, then you can teach somebody how to do a hack squat well. Those are two different skills in their mind. Then all of a sudden they go, wait a second, they feel so similar. What is it underneath these that makes me good at both of them? Mm-hmm. There's one thing. And so when you can connect two different points like that, fill in those gaps, people just get better in lots of different ways, right?
Definitely. So we've talked no, that's perfect. And I was going to say, this is a perfect segue too, because I know we've talked up to this point a lot about martial arts, but I think that these same principles apply to people who want to just get generally stronger, fitter, and maybe improve their strength in certain particular movements. And so even though you're not teaching martial arts to the people who come in who want to do, let's say, the Amazing 12, which is, I know you're a coach with Paul McElroy's Amazing 12, or people who just want to, maybe lose some fat and that sort of a thing. How do you apply the same principle, like things that they might know how to do from just, day-to-day activities, into learning the skill? In this case, rather than being a martial arts skill, it'd be more like kettlebell or a bodyweight skill.
I'm not sure. Restate the question one more time.
Yeah. How do you use a similar approach to taking something that people maybe already understand to learn a new skill when you're not teaching a martial art? Meaning, like, if somebody wants to learn the swing or the snatch, like, what are some ways that you help them to do that with movements that they might be more familiar with, so that you can shorten that learning curve?
Well, I'm sure, you're familiar with a lot of them. A long jump, similar to teaching a swing.
Oh,
right?
Perfect. Yeah.
Getting somebody to jump and land softly on their feet to kind of figure out a good stance for their squat.
Mm-hmm.
But I had one of my martial art instructors, he used to use stories a lot. So I think stories are a really good way to help people connect the dots. For example, pushing the door open with your hips for groceries, right?
Hmm.
Good way to kind of learn how to hinge properly for a deadlift. If you're a martial artist, maybe throwing somebody over your shoulder is a good way to kind of figure out how to do the same thing, or load up for a bent press. But I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Somebody asked, how much do you charge for an hour? And I told them whatever. And it was one of these things where they kind of questioned it. Like, why would you charge that much to just teach me the swing? And so I remember a story somebody told me a long time ago where they hired a famous painter to do a painting for their cat. And I wrote about this on an article one time. So it was an emperor, and he hired a famous artist to paint his emperor's cat in the Sumi style of painting, which is just basically a few lines. In theory, it can be done very quickly. So he's going to pay a large sum of money. It's a big honor. The guy goes away, says, I'll come back when it's done. And months go by. Every time the emperor has somebody check in on this painting, it's not done. A year goes by. The emperor is getting impatient. He finally goes down there and visits him himself, which is a big deal. And he demands to see the painting. Well, the artist says it's not ready yet. So the emperor says, well, I demand to have it now. Paint it now. So he gets out his tools and he quickly does the most amazing Sumi painting of emperor's cat that anybody could ever imagine. And at first, the emperor's super excited and thrilled. And then all of a sudden he thinks about it and he gets angry. He demands an explanation. If you could have done this so quickly, why did you make me wait so long? Why did you make me pay so much? And instead of telling him, he opens up one cabinet and out fall tons of versions of that cat painting, each one better than the last. Then he goes around, he opens up every cupboard in his entire studio, and they're all filled with better versions. And so basically it just wasn't ready yet. You're not paying me for that one rep. You're paying me for all these perfect repetitions that have made me capable of doing this so quickly and efficiently and so well for you, right?
Exactly.
So just like little stories like that, you can connect the dots for somebody. So it's not that when you're doing 100 swings that I want you to just get 100 swings done. Every swing you're doing is making you better at the next rep, right? That last rep is the result of everything you've done here. So if you're checked out mentally doing all these other things, that last rep isn't going to be as good, right? Mm-hmm. But I can judge that one rep, and everything you've done up to that point has led up to that result I see there. It's the importance of always paying attention, always being focused. So just little stories like that seem to be really helpful in helping people connect the dots, I think.
In many ways, yeah, I think I remember reading that when you wrote that article, and there are other similar analogies that I've heard that I think are great. There was one, I don't think they have the same effect as that one, because it's like the vision of seeing just thousands and thousands of these papers falling out of cabinets and cupboards and all this other stuff. It's like you can really see, that's like a visualization of the amount of time that went into it. There's another famous story of, I think it was Pablo Picasso was at some, I don't know, I think it was at a cafe in France, and somebody recognized him, said, will you draw my portrait? He said, all right, well, sure. And so he, gave him like a what do you call it, like a napkin, and he just kind of sketched something really quickly. And he's like, that's awesome, thank you. And he said, okay, that'll be 5,000 francs. He's like, what do you mean? You took like a couple of seconds to just scribble this on the napkin. He said, no, that took my entire life.
Exactly.
And so that's the thing. Yeah, if people are hiring you, they're not hiring you for an hour. That's the amount of time that the lesson is going to take. They're hiring you for the months and years, and in some cases decades of constant practice and refinement and trial and error that goes into that. And it really shows. I mean, if you see people who are, we'll take the kettlebell world, for example, you see people who are not trained in how to teach people how to use a kettlebell, and you can see their students reflected, and it's not because they're bad people. It's just, they don't have the amount of time and instruction that has gone into imparting what they know into what their student needs to know in order to produce something properly.
Yeah, there's so
And
many little stories like that, like Musashi, from one thing, learn 1,000 things, right? So you can
yeah,
watch somebody does one thing, how they just walk up to a kettlebell to do a swing. You can tell volumes from that, right? Yeah.
I love that example actually, because I can always tell how good a technique is going to look based on how they approach the bell and how they set up. Like if they don't take any time to set up, and sometimes it looks funny. Like I saw a video yesterday of somebody setting up to do a sumo deadlift with a barbell, and they're kind of like twisting their foot and they're like getting everything just right, and it looks funny if you are not familiar with setting up for a really heavy deadlift. But if you are familiar with it, you understand the necessity of doing that, because it's like one wrong brush stroke can ruin a painting, just like one wrong joint angle, let's say, in a movement, can be the difference between successfully completing it or making it halfway through and then petering out.
Yeah, all those little details make a big difference when you stack them up. So they have, how do I put this? The difference between somebody who's a beginner and somebody who's an expert. The expert might see an infinite number of details, right? They might just execute it as one movement in their mind, but if they take a look at it, they can see an infinite number of details. A beginner thinks of it as one movement and sees one thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, we'll just lift the darn weight. But yeah, somebody who's lifting a world record attempt at a deadlift, they got rituals within their rituals that they all are adding up and getting right to making that perfect lift possible. Right. But
exactly.
Yeah.
It reminds me of The Mask of Zorro. I don't know if you've seen that movie with Anthony Hopkins plays like the original Zorro, Don Diego de la Vega. And then he's got a student played by, shoot, I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Antonio Banderas.
Yes, Antonio Banderas, playing Alejandro Murrieta. And he's teaching him in this cave, which is, where Don Diego lives. And he pulls out the sword. Alejandro Murrieta pulls out the sword and everything. And Anthony Hopkins' character is like, do you know how to use that thing? He goes, yes, the pointy end goes in the other man. Like he has no concept of like the art behind it and the actual discipline that goes into it. And so, of course, when Anthony Hopkins' character comes up with his sword, he's just able to, without doing anything fancy, just knock the sword out of his hand just with a couple of swipes, because the guy doesn't even know how to hold it correctly. And I think it's very, very similar when we're talking about lifting kettlebells or barbells or doing bodyweight exercises, anything of that nature. And I think that the best example of that comes from the martial arts, because it's like really is very focused on perfection, and you learn how to apply that into other disciplines and suddenly everything becomes easier.
Yeah. It's like you're setting up, see somebody set up in martial arts to do some brick break. You see all the attention to detail and shuffling and breathing. You're like, this is ridiculous. Well, you go out there and try to smash 5 bricks with your hand on the first attempt.
Yeah.
He's got to get it all right. He's got to get his mind right, all this other stuff. So you take that and you apply it to a heavy deadlift, a heavy bench press, one arm, one leg push up. It's the same thing. You got to get all those little details right, and then bang, you can do it.
Yeah. And then it just happens. It appears as though it just happens, and that the rest of it is just showboating, or it's like showmanship or something like that. But that's definitely not the case. I remember back in the early days, I was really interested in the 1-inch punch, because it just seemed like, just like a hard to imagine thing. Like, how can anybody make this happen? And there was a guy, who's a Jeet Kune Do instructor. I mean, there are a couple of Jeet Kune Do instructors I've seen do it. There was one guy in particular. I remember it looked so easy. There was a guy holding the board, and he had like maybe a finger's length of distance, and he just kind of wham, like put his hand through the board, just like split in two, like nothing. And you see that and you think, man, like the guy makes it look so easy, but that's because he spent so much time so that it actually became easy. But every molecule of his body is being oriented toward that one task. So if you don't know how to connect your body from top to bottom, it's like, well, yeah, that's definitely not going to happen. And there's certainly a parallel between that and kettlebell training. Again, kettlebell training is a bit easier to obtain in terms of like skill level than punching through a board, that's like an inch away from you. But
I think on the surface, it might appear easier to learn how to swing a kettlebell, but to swing a kettlebell like a master instructor, that's not easy.
No, that's for sure.
Swing a beast kettlebell and make it look effortless and be safe and crisp. You're not going to teach that to somebody in the first day.
That is true. That is true. There's a difference between teaching someone how to punch versus how to do a 1-inch punch, for example. And the 1-inch punch is built off of all of these just regular punches that you have to put your time and effort into. It does remind me of when I was at my RKC, and I remember seeing Pavel do a swing with a 24. And even now, the image is burned in my mind because it was just like, I'd never seen a swing done so perfectly. It was just like, it was like seeing, I remember it was like, it took his clothes a second to catch up with him. That's just how fast he was moving.
That was a very good description of that. I saw him do that at some of the certifications I went to too. So yeah, his body moved, then the clothes caught up is what it looked like.
Yeah, it really was an impressive sight to see. So yeah, that level of discipline, that level of mastery, it really can exist within anything, whether it's painting, like you were talking about, whether it is martial arts, kettlebell training, or anything like that. But I think a great thing about martial arts is that it teaches you that right from the outset. And I think a lot of people with training, with kettlebell training, they're like, yeah, what's the big deal? The pointy end goes in the other man. It's like Alejandro Murrieta. Kettlebell goes from here to over my head. What's the big deal?
Pick the heavy thing up and you set it back down.
Exactly. On its surface, it is that, but there are a couple of other things that have to happen in order for you to be able to do it successfully.
Yeah, to do it well and to benefit from it. So
exactly. Well, I am sure that people are going to want to follow you upon having heard this very stimulating discussion, and I would encourage them to do that. Where can people find you online?
I have a webpage, www.omahaelite.kettlebell.com, and then Facebook page, Omaha Elite Kettlebell. So those are the two main places.
And folks, I would highly recommend it. Like I said, this is my coach from back in the day, and he and I have stayed in close touch ever since. And we're always trading notes and catching new ideas from each other and trying out new things in training and beyond. And like I said, even now, I'm always learning new stuff from Scott. And I'm very, very happy that I finally get to introduce him to my listeners. And I hope that you guys will go to his webpage, check him out, and soak up some of the knowledge bombs that he drops on a regular basis. So, Scott.
Yeah.
Thank you kindly for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was fun. Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll be able to do this again sometime. Maybe we'll have more stories about, the butt kickery that you engaged in the martial arts world, because I always love hearing those stories.
I've you gave me a heads up on one of the questions, and one of the stories I was going to tell you is about me getting my butt kicked. So maybe we'll do that next time. So
we'll save that for next time. I want the mystique, to be able to continue from here. So we'll cover that next time. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been good.
My pleasure. And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.